Hi, everybody. Darin Lynch, founder and CEO of Irish Titan, here for our third installment of Headless Commerce with Brad Gustavson from Ultra Commerce. How you doing, Brad?
Not too bad. How are you, Darin?
Good, good. For any viewers who are jumping into our trilogy here at the end, you want to give a quick rundown of yourself and Ultra Commerce just to quickly familiarize themselves with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Brad Gustavson. I'm the CMO at Ultra Commerce. And Ultra Commerce is a headless commerce platform. Our specialty and what makes us stand out in the market is that we are a headless commerce solution, completely API driven. But we're a full commerce platform. So everything from the front end with building on storefronts, of course, with our headless commerce platform, but then on the back end, we have an order management solution. We have a solution around product management, product data management, account management, all that. So it's a full suite of e-commerce tools and services that help differentiate us out. And of course, it's all accessible due to the fact that it's headless commerce based.
Good. Thanks for that rundown, Brad. And for anybody new to the series, as I mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Irish Titan. We're an e-commerce agency. So we build and grow e-commerce channels. We do that with a Titan-only model. So we do all of our work with just our Titans. That's how we refer to our employees. We have a strategy, creative, engineering, and project management practice. So we cut a pretty broad path. That's why we say we build and grow e-commerce channels. And we're closed only 2 days a year, St. Patrick's Day and the day after. And we do work with great partners like Ultra Commerce. So thanks for spending some time today, Matt. Or Matt. I don't know why I called you Matt. Brad. Sorry. Actually, I know why, because there's someone outside my office named Matt right now. This is the beauty of recorded Zooms. We're just going to keep rolling with this, right?
Yep.
All right. So I think let's remind everybody that since this is the third piece of the trilogy, we're comparing this to Dark Knight Rises. I'm a bit of a Batman fan, right? So if anybody feels like they really missed the boat, since this is third and not second with Dark Knight, which is generally regarded as the best of the three, don't worry. Dark Knight Rises is also a classic, actually an underrated movie. So we've been talking about headless in each of the conversations we've had. And, I think previously we've covered the high-level benefits of headless and descriptions of it because it means different things to different people. I think there's an emerging, generally understood definition of it. We got a little more technical in the second conversation that we had, and I think today we want to cover what might emerge in people's minds as that third step of really understanding headless, and it's like the migration path, right? How do you get there? What does that look like? So I think if we start there, Brad, what does a migration to headless look like? And you and I can bounce back and forth on this because we both have a lot of firsthand experiences, but why don't you start us with, in your words, what does a migration to headless look like?
Yeah. And that's really, I think, that's the next question, right? Once someone sits down and they're sold on the concept, then it's sort of like, well, how do we do this? And the biggest benefit also causes another kind of headless in general, causes another decision to be made as part of that process, which is, do we want to, as part of the headless migration, replace everything, or do we want to leave that front end in place and essentially replace out the commerce with a new commerce platform, keeps the design the same, maybe a little edit. So really that piece alone sort of starts that conversation around the migration plan. And then you'll get certain companies that are really happy with where they are from a CMS and a front end standpoint. Others that are like, what, we're gonna solve that problem too as part of the migration to the headless platform. So you end up with a number of decisions kind of to level set where we are right now. What do we want to make better? And I'm sure you probably hear from some of the clients that you're talking to, they come in and they've got a list of grievances, right, that they want to solve, and they might only be on the commerce side, but they might be on the CMS side too.
The airing of grievances.
Airing of grievances, exactly, and that's really what it is, And I think part of that challenge is, well, which ones are the priorities that we need to deal with right now? And once you start bucketing those out as and it's probably with the marketing team, but the IT and the technical team are going to be involved too on the client side to say, yeah, here's the things that we need to fix right now, and the commerce is the way to go. Let's start there, and then we'll tackle the CMS piece later. Or if they're in love with the CMS that they've got and the front end looks really great, well, how do we tackle that from a just commerce only perspective, right? And kind of and deal with it that way.
Right. I think when I was giving some thought to preparing for this conversation, I had a lot of the same themes that you just mentioned, because there are nuances, of course, to a headless, and we'll talk about those, and you've mentioned some of those. But in some regards, it's no different than well thought out approaches to any project of a technical nature.
Yeah.
Right? I think that scope is something that's difficult to manage in our worlds in general, right? Before Headless came along, we still were challenged with scope, both as providers and if we were on the other side of the table as merchants, because what we're doing lives at the intersection of three intangible fluid disciplines: design, technology, and marketing. And living right there is tough. So scope is a challenge. Technology is rapidly changing. I think that one of the things that has emerged with how Headless should be approached is that focus on data and integrations, like you talked about, right? Because in previous e-commerce generations, which is a different timeline and different cycle than demographic generations, right? But I think in those previous generations of e-commerce platforms and e-commerce channels, you sometimes were hamstrung with your e-commerce integrations because you might have an antiquated ERP, and upgrading your ERP might take years, right? And there's lots of elephant graveyards with failed ERP upgrades and implementations.
Yeah.
Well, in today's e-commerce environment, most of the ERPs have been upgraded now, and so the ability to integrate is exponentially easier than it was before. So what that does, though, I think, is it frees up, or I think it emphasizes the need to shift your focus from figuring out how to technically integrate to focusing on that data and those integration paths, right? Yeah. Because that's really a big part of the core of Headless, right? Is you're separating the shopping cart from the rest of the experiences or the rest of the devices, so they have to talk to each other. So I think that was one of the main themes that really came to mind for me as I was thinking about this. So building on that, what are your thoughts around what merchants really need to have? What are their must-haves before a migration to Headless?
Yeah, I mean, you just hit on part of it. And I think the first thing is when someone sits down and looks at that platform, is to say, well, what are all the different services that I'm going to need to connect in here? And some are going to be super easy, right? It's going to be get set up on PayPal, your payment provider, drop in your credentials and you're good to go. Flip on a payment or flip on a shipping provider, not a big deal. But when you start thinking about ERP, something like that starts to come into play. And to your point, the integrations are a lot easier. The question inevitably comes with, okay, well, we're integrated, but which system owns what now as part of that? If you're shipping out, maybe you're taking your orders, e-commerce, you're syncing the order over to your ERP. Well, that's great, but which system's going to send out like the order confirmation email? Which system's sending out the tracking delivery and those kinds of things? So
where is your one version of truth?
Exactly. Who owns what? Who's doing who being the system, of course, and how does that all play? And are you able to get things back and forth the right way? And we were in a conversation a few months back, and someone was looking to integrate with a point of sale system, which is great. The problem, of course, that they were sort of assuming the whole time that they would be able to integrate gift cards back and forth between the two, so a true like one customer experience. And they quickly found out that that wasn't going to be possible. The point of sale had locked that down. So that's not necessarily a game changer, but from a customer experience standpoint, now you've got to layer in some service, some logic, some copy, some training to deal with that, so that the customer can understand that when they're live in a store and want to use a gift card that they just bought online, they can't. So to have that level of understanding across the whole ecosystem, I think becomes really important. And I think it starts off, and I'm sure you guys lead this as part of your engineering process as well, is let's identify all the different things, right? Because there's lots of little hidden systems, depending on the organization size. that are going to need to connect in. And the last thing you want to do is get 6 weeks or 2 months before launch and find out that there's a whole other thing that you need to connect with.
Right. Yeah, I think that it goes by different terms, right? But like your architecture diagram or your SOA, services oriented architecture diagram, I think that is really key for a shared understanding of where things live, right?
Right.
You have your CMS, your ERP, your e-commerce system, your POS maybe. Maybe you have a separate fulfillment system, maybe even a PIM, and I'll get to that here in a second. Like, where does your data lie, so that wherever your confirmations are coming from or wherever data is to be pulled for presentation online, you know where that should be coming from, right? And I think that sometimes a lot of merchants don't quite have that figured out yet, and I don't really fault them for that, because this has been emerging pretty quickly over the last couple of years. I wouldn't say recklessly. It hasn't been emerging recklessly, and it's not going to be one of those fads that comes and goes. But I feel like the technology has advanced a lot in the last, 5-10 years.
Right.
And then I think solutions to capitalize on those investments from the last 5 to 10 years have emerged rapidly over the last few years. So, for example, a PIM. I think PIMs are becoming increasingly valuable as repositories for where at least your product data can live, right? Because absent that, in a headless environment with your commerce, with your ERP, with your fulfillment, with your CRM, like, your data can start to live in a whole bunch of different places. And a PIM can help centralize that. So I think PIMs are going to emerge over the next few years as one of the next frontiers of commonly adopted tools.
Yeah, and I was just thinking too, for that, based on the successful projects that your team has been a part of, who do you recommend from a team standpoint? If you were kicking off to build out that architectural map, you're getting a marketing team member in there, someone in IT, or maybe a former developer,
right?
Or what steps does your team take to sort of encourage that process to happen?
Yeah, I think, great question. I think we tend to do best, or I shouldn't say we, I think the project experience is the most success when there is involvement and knowledge and familiarity and intimacy on behalf of the merchant that then informs us as we need to build that. What we found is when the merchant tries to own too much of
Right.
defining and constructing their SOA diagram, that it takes too long, or because they're sidetracked by other internal priorities,
Right.
or it's not as relevant for what we're trying to accomplish,
Right.
because it becomes more of an internal doc
Yes.
than either an external and or project doc. So when we've been able to work directly with the merchant, with somebody from marketing, with a business articulate developer or engineer,
Yeah.
and then our team, and it particularly becomes powered on our behalf by our project managers and our engineers, right? Our strategy team and our creative team aren't really involved as much in that. But that's what results in that architectural diagram that really is extremely crucial for a shared understanding as the project gets underway.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the fact that you need to include both the business team, broadly speaking, and a technical team, broadly speaking, in that is key, right?
Right.
And it's so easy to go out as a business and sign up for lots of different services. The important part starts to become, or the critical part becomes, well, how do we all connect it together, right? You go
Right.
out, you sign up for a PIM in 20 minutes, sign up for all these other services.
Right.
That's easy, that's great, and you get lots of benefit from it. But optimizing that is where a project like that starts to come in, especially from the headless standpoint. You have the headless platform, it has product capabilities, but you want a PIM to own that. Well, now how do you get that data in there? Back and forth, syncing, whatever word you want to use, and then what else could the PIM be connected to outside of for the rest of the company? How can that work? How do you optimize it?
Right.
How do you make sure that data is getting entered there and not somewhere else that someone just doesn't know about it, right?
Right.
So there's so much operational to it.
I'll make one observation before moving on to our final question, and that is, I think it's been interesting to observe how technology, IT involvement and the intensity of IT involvement has changed over the years. So I started Irish Titan way back in 2004. And I think building e-commerce platforms at that point, it was really monolithic, right? Like Headless didn't exist back then, right? Cloud didn't exist back then. Everything was really monolithic. So there was a really heavy IT kind of lift, right? And IT in capital terms, right? Like developers and networking and hosting and all of that, right? And then newer platforms started to emerge, maybe around 14, 15, 16, that really lightened the load from that intensity perspective, right? And you could get up and running easier. There are still significant efforts to get up and running and launch it, but you would say that the balance shifted from being an engineering IT driven project to more of a marketing driven project, which I would argue actually is better, right? E-commerce is meant to drive revenue. And so it should be driven by marketing, by product, by sales, rather than what, to oversimplify, but to emphasize my argument, would be like an operational team, an IT team, right? Well, now with the emergence of Headless, it's sort of a marrying of the two, because marketing and sales and the business side have realized the greater results of by themselves driving an e-commerce initiative, but there needs to be more technology, and I'll say technology more than IT, right? More technology involvement now with Headless, because you are tying together these different systems. So I think that the technologists who can speak business and the business people who can speak technology, those are the client teams that tend to be more successful.
And to hear you describe that, I mean, we talk a lot about the pendulum and how it swings, and I think there's always an overcorrection, really developer tech heavy, and then it can swing the other way where it's kind of point and click, which is great, but it drives developers crazy, right? Because they can't do anything. And there's kind of a sweet spot, a happy medium there, and I think you sort of nailed it talking about where Headless fits in there. I think from a lot of people's perspective, they sort of say it or think of it as something that the dev team alone can sort of fall in love with, because you get the API and I can do whatever I want and connect it here and connect it there. And that's certainly true, but I think there's also, from a marketing business perspective, to say, well, yeah, absolutely. That's great for the devs, and that's cool. I can go to them and harass them to build stuff for me, and they can deliver it with a little bit more flexibility. Great, but at the same time, now I can go out as a business user and find the services, the components, whatever I might want to connect in there that works for me, not necessarily because I'm limited in my choices, and when you sort of make that assumption, and you had the point earlier about having really great APIs. It gives you that flexibility to sort of assume, even though assumptions can be dangerous, but it gives you that flexibility to assume that if you find a service out there that really scratches an itch, you can probably connect it back to whatever other platforms you have. And that's really the freedom of choice at the end of the day, right?
Right. And freedom of choice is a good thing.
Yes, absolutely.
So last question, not just for today, but in our entire series, our trilogy. What would you say you have seen cause the most pain in these Headless migrations?
Yeah, I think you and I have already hit on it separately. It's data and it's integrations. And I think, data in general across e-commerce, whether it's a big project, a small project, a complete storefront, a proof of concept store, whatever, is always a challenge. And that can be just starting from scratch, getting your product catalog in. We talked about PIM. And at the same time, migrating from one platform to another, or trying to run platforms in parallel. Data is just always a challenge. And it's something that the business team wants to ignore and is just going to assume is going to magically move over. And no one on the dev side wants to be like, hey, no one's raising their hand to say, I want to be in charge of importing and exporting data.
Right.
So that's, I think, the one thing where you have to force yourself to sit down on day one and say, okay, this is great. We're all in on this migration, on this move, on this replatforming, this launch, whatever that's going to be. But we got to talk data, and we got to start talking now about it.
Right. Right.
And then on the flip side with integrations, which sort of dovetails with data as well, is the same thing. Start the conversation earlier. We just talked architectural map, knowing all those services, and even you don't want to get too overly technical too early, but I think there's some value in mapping out some time, especially for the tech team, to look at the services that they're going to need to connect with, and just sort of having a summary of, okay, we're going to connect to this system and we need to pull this data. Can I at least find it in the API docs, or is documentation even available? Kind of a cursory look, so that if there are red flags, and maybe some other system needs to be replaced, or you need to find a bridge or something to kind of make it work, you discover that earlier in the process. I think that's, from my perspective, I think those are the two things that tend to cause some bumps. And if you can iron them out over time, it tends to work out better. I don't know if you share the same thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can be concise, I think, because you really nailed the two themes, right? Because I think there are always challenges with projects, right? People and scope and all that jazz. But integrations and data are the two main pain points that we see. The distinction between the two is most people know going into the project, most stakeholders and most project team members on both the merchant side and the SI and tech partner side know that the integrations are a challenge. Integrations have been a challenge for 20 years. That's not new, right? I think data is the challenge that is underestimated and taken for granted. Yeah. And data hygiene, data sources, data mapping, all of those data-related exercises are underestimated almost every time. And so that's the distinction. Nobody underestimates integrations. It's hard to estimate what an integration is going to take, and everybody kind of knows that. Data gets overlooked. And so that's how I can wrap that up.
Yeah.
And I think, Brad, that actually wraps up our whole trilogy around Headless. I think we kicked off talking about how Headless for a while was a bit of a fad. We heard about it at conferences, inside baseball kind of conferences, like our e-commerce conferences, right? And it's emerged as a reality, right? Like a lot of our work, literally I can say at Irish Titan, a lot of our work is Headless. And a lot of that work is spanning different solutions, different industries, even though Headless means different things to different people. But if you think about it and separating the shopping cart from the experience and from the content and maybe from the device, that's what Headless is, and that's not going to go away, right? Like, I think we're here to stay and might start to be called something different in the next few years, and different solutions will emerge to help enable it. But it's been fun talking about Headless because it's been fun to see it go from inside baseball e-commerce conferences to being talked about in regular LinkedIn articles.
Yeah, exactly. And we've certainly seen that. I mean, the speed with which the community around commerce, technical folks, developers, agencies, certainly on the business side as well, quickly grasp the concept, because the problem that it solves is clear. Once you get beyond any kind of lingo in the industry, the need and the understanding that anybody has who's been down the e-commerce road, they get it, right?
Yep.
Like, oh yeah, I 2004 or whatever, I was launching a store and it was a nightmare, or this was a pain, and they get the benefits, and I think that's what's helped speed up the adoption quite a bit, to your point.
I agree, and it's been one of those rare emergences in the industry where what I've seen is technology people like working on it, our developers and engineers, just as much as our strategists and marketers, just as much as the merchants. So it seems to be a combination of something new, but that also really unleashes a lot of their own personal areas of power that they can bring to the table.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of it, to have a solution that two different audiences can get fired up about and be really enthusiastic about is what makes it unique and really fun at the same time.
Right. Well, Brad, thanks for the time over these conversations. It's been fun. And I think, if I may, I hope we can trade back and forth the role, but I would like for you to be Batman today and in the second part, because I want to be Joker, right, who doesn't. And I want to be Bane in this third one, because Bane's coat is badass, that full-length leather sheepskin coat. And then I'll be Batman in the first one, and you can be Scarecrow or Ra's al Ghul.
That sounds good. Yeah, flip it around a little bit. Absolutely.
All right. So on behalf of Ultra Commerce and Irish Titan, thanks for tuning into these. We'll be posting these, answering questions back and forth online, and hope to engage with everybody going forward. So thanks again, Brad. Thanks, Ultra Commerce.
Thank you.
Launch, everybody. Talk soon.